Welcome to Pirate Politics, where we prepare you for your next political conversation. I'm Jeronimo Cortina, a political science professor at the University of Houston.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus, also a political science professor here at the University of Houston. Thanks for hanging out and talking politics with us. Election week is here. There's a lot to cover there, but we've got a bunch of things in the news. Brian McKnight is back, my friend.
I'm sorry, who?
I know you're a super fan.
Oh.
Katy Perry and Justin Trudeau are dating, apparently. This
Yes.
is sort of all of
I know
the
that.
socials.
That
That you
one.
did
Yes.
know. Okay.
Yeah.
You still can't get FIFA tickets. I'm going to blame the supermoon on that, some kind of weird cosmic thing.
I'm trying my hardest.
Working a deal. If anyone knows, like, who's listening or watching,
Just
help us out. Help
it's
out Dr.
me and my
Cortina.
kid, and that's it.
That's all. And finally, the shutdown continues
Yes.
with some possible hope for recovery. We'll talk about that. Yeah, skeptical hope, but hope.
Okay.
Right. Isn't that
All
the
right.
best kind of hope? It's like will my team win hope? So I think that's among the most
Well, all right.
lucrative.
I'll hear what you have to say.
Well, let's talk about Brian McKnight, and I know you're a big fan. As is John Whitmire, apparently. The mayor of Houston has decided to invite Brian McKnight to be the MC for the Thanksgiving parade and tree lighting here in Houston.
Okay.
Brian McKnight was a famous artist, R&B from the 90s, some very famous songs.
Oh.
I know that you don't know, but you maybe just don't remember because you kind of blocked out just the dulcet tones of Mr. McKnight.
I mean, I was 90s more a Garth Brooks kind of person. Even Shania Twain,
Yeah.
she's Canadian, but she had a nice country music, and obviously Garth Brooks. What was that album?
Oh, yeah.
Storm.
No, it wasn't Stormfront. He
Yeah.
covered that. He
Yeah,
did,
that was a great album.
It's still the best-selling country album.
Oh, yeah.
That is Shania Twain.
Oh,
is.
yeah.
Like, she still has the record.
Yeah,
So, but Brian McKnight does not. But he is going to be here in Houston if you want to talk to him because
sure.
But people push back on this. I think for this kind of reason, they're saying like, why Brian McKnight? Like, and actually, as it turns out, Brian McKnight has some public controversy with his children. This dramatic kind of estrangement from his older biological children, who in 2024 he referred to as the products of sin and evil. I know that this is sort of the way that you refer to your children, not publicly maybe, but privately. Is this a good choice? Is this going to be a problem for John Whitmire? Does it lean into the notion that he's like a fuddy-duddy, right? Kind of doesn't understand like the current zeitgeist of Houston, and a young, dynamic city.
Well, when you mention his name, I have nothing against art or music or anything like that.
Sounds like you do, though.
No, not at all. I didn't know who he was, and you have, as we have said, Beyonce. Why not?
Yeah, Beyonce is a good choice,
Right?
Yeah.
She's from Houston.
Yeah. That would draw a crowd for sure.
Yeah.
Not sure Brian McKnight's going to, but there are people on social who are like, this is just, a mistake. We need to do better. We're Houston. We can, have this sort of huge litany of people who are not only from here, but also who
I can do it.
have come. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
You can sing Despacito at that point. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
they would really go for that. The crowd would just go wild.
Oh, absolutely. Some steps in and boom.
I love it. A little choreography goes a long way, my friend.
I know.
Yeah, just ask your friend Beyonce. Well, let's talk about the rest of the political landscape because there's a lot of big news this week. Nancy Pelosi has announced that she is not seeking re-election in this next cycle. She's 85 years old, but she has been a trailblazer, a pioneer when it comes to women in politics and when it comes to passing big legislation for Democrats in this moment. She was, of course, the first female Speaker of the House elected in 2007. She was a legislative guru. She was able to get through the Affordable Care Act, the ARA, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So a lot of these big coalitional moments for Democrats were because of Nancy Pelosi. What do you think is her legacy?
Well, I mean, it's huge.
Yeah.
We would have to devote a whole episode to talk about her legacy. I mean, including with, obviously, that we're going to talk briefly about it, Dick Cheney's legacy. But I think Nancy Pelosi brought in an era where politics was controlled basically by men. She basically said, move aside, I'm going through. And that's what she did. I think it's the right time for her to retire. I think it's the right time to step aside and do these generational, passing the baton and just have. And as you said, I think one of the most important aspects, maybe not only in terms of ceremonial positions, but the first Speaker of the House that push forward legislation in such a way that was extremely, extremely effective.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think, her ability to hold that coalition together through some tough times is a real model for how it happens today. It also created some backlash. And I think part of the reason that, she's retiring when she is that there is this kind of passing of the torch, right? You're seeing the older generation of Democrats and Republicans decide to hang it up and, leave politics, and the younger generation is now becoming kind of more prominent. It's happening very slowly, but she definitely, I think, exacerbated some of that tension, even while being successful kind of in what she did. It's funny because you see this as a transition point for John Cornyn. A lot of people who are anti-Cornyn are saying, well, look, Nancy Pelosi stepping aside, how about you step aside too? So it's becoming kind of this more national discussion. But I think for her, at least, the inter-party tension definitely rose during her time in office. One of my favorite Pelosi moments, it's still a gif that I use often, is where she rips up the State of the Union speech after the 2020 Trump State of the Union. Dramatic moment, and definitely one that makes her a lightning rod for these issues in a way that she didn't care, and she was able to really use, I think, politically as to her effect. But obviously it did create this kind of tension that now exists today. Whether that caused it or whether it was caused by something else, there's just a lot of kind of uncertainty. But for sure it's the case that it was in the keeping with kind of how politics were at that moment. Speaking of some sad news, former Vice President Dick Cheney has passed away. His legacy in politics is also significant and controversial. So what are we to take away from Dick Cheney's life and career?
Well, I mean, you know more about these things than I do because that's your area of study. But I think that it was a transformation. An office that constitutionally doesn't have any powers whatsoever, right? He transformed it. Also, I think, if we think another important vice presidents, Al Gore maybe in the same category. But I mean, it's shape, I think, the role of the office that other vice presidents have not followed through at that level, but at least, I guess, opened the door and said, now we are also part of the governing coalition one way or the other.
Yeah, starting with Walter Mondale, you start to see vice presidents have a more advanced role. But I think Dick Cheney is one of the most dramatic and impactful vice presidents in history. He really was a co-president. One of my former colleagues, she wrote a book about the co-presidency of Bush and Cheney, which made it sound like President Bush wasn't adequately able to govern, and that's not true. It was mostly just that Cheney insisted that there be this kind of parallel arrangement where whatever the kind of meeting was that was happening and president's kind of staff was there, the vice president's staff would be there too. So it was this kind of parallel government that really did work well, at least in terms of kind of keeping things orderly, especially after 9/11 when things were so controversial. So he goes from the kind of Darth Vader to Trump antagonist, which is really interesting, right? But he had very firm opinions about kind of how politics should work, and he played it as hard as anybody did. And really, I think, set the stage for the way that we think of the presidency today, right? Like his approach to the unitary presidency, his willingness to, kind of press Congress and to try to press the executive to sidestep Congress when necessary is definitely a model for how we see the presidency today. So that is effective.
For sure.
And made him really an outstanding kind of vice president in the way that we sort of characterize typically vice presidents as being, not that important, right? Which is totally wrong. And, the joke, of course, was always like Vice President Nance Gardner used to say, the vice presidency is not worth a warm cup of spit, but it really is actually. And you can see in Cheney how effective that was. To your point, we did this survey with the colleague on presidential greatness, and we asked people about vice presidential greatness, to which a lot of people in the survey responded what do you mean vice presidential greatness? What does that even look like? But we got some great verbatims where people had comments about kind of how vice presidents function. And one of the things we found was that Gore is the one who ranks highest on policy advice and to their president, and Cheney's number 2. So this is a new breed of vice presidents who weren't just picked because like you balance the ticket geographically or even politically. Like you're able to be a real policy advisor, and Cheney really did, I think, change a lot of that. But it's still controversial, right? I mean, it defines the split in the Republican Party we're looking at today. He was a hawk in a changing political party that now embraces, to some degree at least, kind of in like lack of interventionism or non-interventionism. So is that to blame for the kind of tension foreign policy-wise in the Republican Party today?
I mean, it would be interesting to trace the steps, right? Because I understand these unitary executive theory, but there was a limit, right? And I think that Cheney had some conceptions in terms of politics or political decorum or something and a line that you don't cross, right? And I'm not an executive scholar as you are, because the presidency is a riveting and fascinating topic.
We have an N=1 problem, but
exactly,
that one is pretty impactful.
Yes, indeed. I think that the idea that you have to respect the Constitution and this balance and separation of powers is like, I'm going to push it, and then to the line as close as I can, but I'm not going to cross the line. And I think that this presidency, the strategy is perhaps let's cross the line, right? And see how the Supreme Court is going to send us back, or maybe not.
That's a good point.
And that is a risk that we're going to see starting today when the Supreme Court starts discussing the Trump administration tariffs. Right? So we'll see.
It's a great point, and there's some discussion that Trump might show up to this. Apparently, he's decided not to. So I think that's probably for the best when it comes to the separation of powers, as you say, which can be very delicate and has to be handled carefully.
Yep.
Dick Cheney is, to my knowledge, the only political science PhD who served as vice president. Till now. I mean, maybe you're going to throw your hat in the ring on this. You could,
I don't think that's not.
You're not happy about that. You could be, in all these meetings. Yeah,
sure.
The vice president gets a helicopter too. So,
really?
Yeah, and a plane. So, not bad, right?
Okay.
I like the Dick Cheney kind of scenario because obviously there's like long life for his daughter and daughters in politics, and that's interesting too, to see that legacy unfold and become part of this more antagonistic storyline for Donald Trump. But for every intern out there in DC who's wondering, kind of what my trajectory looks like, Dick Cheney went from intern to chief of staff to the president in like a handful of years. And so by 34, he was like the chief of staff to Gerald Ford. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, wild, right? It probably didn't happen much anymore.
I mean, I'm 35 now, so I guess that route is gone. But I can see it.
Well, if we're not going to tell the truth, then let's just move on to other non-truthful items, including the current president's ballroom donors. There is some concern that the donors themselves have too strong a linkage to the policies, and then there's concern that like they're not telling the truth about all of the donors, like you and your age.
Okay.
So what do you take from this? Is this a problem for the Trump administration?
I think it is a problem, right? It is a problem. It is a problem, especially not so much with those are antagonists towards President Trump or the MAGA movement. But I think it's a problem within the MAGA movement. Because the MAGA movement, believe it or not, there are some purists within the MAGA movement, right? And the whole premise of clean up the swamp or dry the swamp or whatever it is, right? Increase transparency, do not have this mingling of obscure interests, mingling with politics, on and so forth, doesn't resonate very well with, I think, an important part of the MAGA movement.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Those are the ones that are going to turn out and vote every single day and are going to be there to support the movement. So that is very tricky because the lack of transparency can say,
that's a great point. I think that the divide between like MAGA Trump and MAGA is real, right? There are people who came to the movement because of Trump, and there are people who came to the movement because they like the kind of issues.
Right.
But Trump is not the purest MAGA. I think you make a great point where it's like that is a very devious and distinction. And so it's useful to consider that in this context where there is concern about ethics and transparency when it comes to government. The donor list is incomplete. It includes a lot of people who are on kind of various enforcement-related violations for labor, consumer, environmental issues. So there's a lot of kind of complications there. And really, at the end of the day, it's about a quid pro quo, right? If I give you this money for this ballroom, there's an expectation that you get something in return.
Of course.
Maybe it's a meeting, maybe it's a favorable contract, who knows what, right? But that's the concern that happens now.
I mean, and some of the reports that we have seen in the media is that some of these donors have billions of dollars of contracts with the federal government, right? So
it's tough. No, that's what that blurs the kind of line between private and public government, and it also complicates oversight, right? Where Congress can't look at it and say, well, look, we're going to scrutinize your budget, right? Which was always a concern for the White House. Like looking at their budget was an issue, but now they can just outsource it, right? Let's call Tim Cook and get me $1 billion for this ballroom. So aside from the kind of complications of the ballroom itself, which we've talked about, this definitely has kind of problems in terms of the ethical responsibilities here. Well, let's talk about government in Washington, such as it is, and that's the shutdown still continues. It's now the longest shutdown in U.S. history. What are we doing? What is going to happen? Is it going to end anytime soon?
I don't know. I mean,
we both have to catch flights this week.
Yes.
Are we going to get like a clean TSA line?
No, I don't think so. And first and foremost is completely unfair, right? To these folks that are working without pay. Is like, no, that it simply is wrong, period, end of story. But the main point here, I think, is that November 1st passed, right? Democrats already have the notices of people like Obamacare is going to increase. And if you know anyone that is on Obamacare and see how those numbers are going to increase, it's insane. I mean, it goes a lot in some places, from some cases, I don't know, $300 to $1,000, right? And he's like, wait, what? How?
Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah. I mean, it's a sizable problem for people, and there are also this concern about SNAP benefits, right? Which the federal judge said that the White House had to pay. They agreed to do so, and then President Trump said, no, we're not going to do that. So to me, I think when it comes to this question about kind of who owns the shutdown, that creates a problem for Republicans when Donald Trump keeps saying, well, we're supposed to do this, but we're not going to, right? Perpetuating the fight, in effect. When he was on with Norah O'Donnell on CBS, and basically she asked him what he was doing to end the shutdown, and he pivoted to say, well, it's the Democrats' fault. That may be true, but it's not the case that people see him as trying to solve this problem. So when polling asks who's to blame, by about 10%, people say Trump and the Republicans. So he's not doing himself any favors in terms of trying to get the better of this. And I think that the elections that we'll talk about in a second may also have an effect of perpetuating this, because Democrats look at this and say, well, look, it seems to me, and they're reading kind of the tea leaves here, that the public is against Trump and they want to see pushback and they want to return to normalcy and the fighting for the things that are kind of kitchen table issues. Well, is that going to perpetuate things?
I mean, sure. I mean, not perpetuate them in the sense of keeping the shutdown, but motivate people. And the other irony of these issues, I think, the president likes to negotiate, right? He's an innate negotiator,
right?
So I don't understand why.
Why aren't you negotiating?
Right.
What's the art of the deal? Just to blame and walk away?
Well, I mean, because I think he could extract something, right, or find a deal, and the way that he controls the narrative, right? And his online presence and social media, he could flip the script in such a way that would benefit him. But as you say, the elections, SNAP benefits, airports, sluggish economy in terms of consumer prices, so on and so forth. Those are things that are like, you better get this thing open sooner rather than later.
And the East Wing's being demolished for this grandiose new ballroom, which, has its issues, but like the visuals of this are pretty jarring, where it's like the president's engaging in this billion-dollar enterprise to basically
The
only
Halloween
benefit
party,
a handful
yes.
of people. Yeah. And here, of course, people are suffering because of the increase in costs and everything else. So definitely problematic, I think, for the Republicans. So we'll see. I mean, there is, though, a group of Democrats who are saying, we want this to end. Like, it has to be some kind of out game.
Yeah.
And so there is movement towards that. Now, of course, we're recording this midweek. We don't know if this will be the determining factor, but it definitely is the case that I think frustrations have boiled over and people want a deal to get the heck out of this thing. So we'll see. But let's talk about these elections because there are a lot of interesting stuff going on. Here in Texas, one of the biggest things was Congressional District 18. Christian Menefee and Amanda Edwards are headed to a runoff. What do you make of this?
Well, no surprise.
Pretty much as expected, right?
As expected. The difference between the two, not great. I mean, not a great difference or anything like that.
Both establishment, pretty traditional Democrats.
Yeah. So it's the runoff that everybody was expecting with 16 candidates. So now we're down to 2.
Right. Yeah. Now you can at least have a kind of something more clear to target. Right.
Yeah. So,
now there's a possibility that this will be setting up a race against Al Green because this is the temporary seat. Right. And then, of course, the primary comes in March. So the person who's in this position, because the runoff won't be until January, probably because of the way the law works, it's likely that a person who's in the spot will be in power for like 4 weeks. Right. Then they have to run again in a primary, maybe against Al Green. That's going to be a really intriguing matchup. But as it is now, pretty expected in a district like that. City Council here, Alejandra Salinas was able to get into a runoff with Dwight Boykins. Both got about 20% of the vote. Also not terribly surprising. This was sort of expected. She spent a lot of money. And he benefited to some degree from the bump from CD18. So this is sort of another race we're going to watch in December when that runoff happens. There's other things happening across the state. Senate District 9 was pretty interesting up in Tarrant County.
It was.
The Democrat Taylor Ramett was able to almost avoid a runoff against Republican Lee Womagans, who is a well-known conservative activist. We talked about her a couple of weeks ago. Are you surprised by that? Do you read this as a kind of rebuke to Trump, Abbott, Patrick?
I mean, if you add up the two Republicans' numbers, they outnumber Democrats.
Right. In a way that's expected in that district,
Right. Yeah. Exactly, in that district. But I was surprised that Democrats, didn't win or didn't get the 50% plus 1. But didn't do very shabby.
That's a good point.
And it was...
considering these elections tended to be low turnout. And Democrats don't win in this spot.
Exactly.
And Dan Patrick kind of puts his thumb on the scale. So that's at least enough that Democrats are not going to be successful. But you got close.
Yeah, close. And now for the runoff, if it's well-funded, well-run, maybe.
Maybe so.
Maybe.
I don't think that... It's the case. The progressives did that well in Texas, not surprisingly, right? News at 11. But basically, you look down the ballot, like in here in 18, Isaiah Martin, who was the kind of the kind of more progressive candidate, didn't win. Proposition Q in Austin failed by a pretty big number. You saw tax hikes rejected in Socorro ISD and Hayes, Blanco, Taylor, Liberty Hill. These are definitely indications that conservatives are still very much, I think, political force in Texas. It's not to say that there won't be some sort of moments where Democrats are successful, but this, although you see nationally this kind of what people are calling a blue wave, you didn't really see it here in Texas. Let's talk about some of these consequential propositions. There's a bunch that passed. Well, they all passed. Not surprising, right? We anticipated that would be true. But there's a lot of money at stake here. For people's tax kind of pocket, payer pocket, but also in terms of money spent. What do you think are the most important ones?
Well, Proposition 4, $1 billion per year for the water fund. That's fantastic. Down payment for the Alzheimer dementia research center. Also, I think it's great. Then you have a bunch regarding property taxes, increasing the homestead exemption from 100 to 140,000, and then some more controversial, like Proposition 12, that talks about the governor having more control in terms of how to discipline judges. So it's an overstep of the judiciary or not. I don't know.
Certainly gives him more authority. Though,
yeah,
right,
it gives
to appoint
him
people.
more authority to do that. And in addition to the already authority that he has in nominating vacancies, so on and so forth. So it's, I guess, I don't know, good and bad at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the bad is that there are always consequences to policy choices.
Yeah.
So the bail reform issue is one.
Correct.
Right? The proposition denies bail to violent offenders, some violent offenders, and that's going to put a strain on jail, especially like the Harris County jail that's already pretty taxed.
Yep.
The property tax money is going to be helpful for people who own property, but it also is a complicated arrangement because it's going to be very expensive. Like some $50 to $60 billion per biennium is going to be devoted to tax relief in this way, and that gets pretty spendy pretty fast. So obviously future budgets are going to have to accommodate this. Happily, Texas is pretty successful economically, but that could change. But in the last remaining minutes we have here, let's talk about the big picture about the elections. Like, what's your big takeaway from New York, Virginia, New Jersey?
Think Democrats did great. They had a great night. And I think that it may be sounding the alarm for the Trump administration.
Yeah. They solved the turnout problem. They spent a lot of money.
Yep.
They got a message that works. It's a winning strategy, but obviously it's temporary.
It's a winning strategy, and we're going to talk more about those and many other winning strategies next week. I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. The party keeps up next week.